A stormy night on the great estate, a night which will be long remembered, though the inhabitants of the house do not yet realize it, for little do they know that they are about to experience terror at Collinwood. Welcome to episode 11 of Terror at Collinwood. I am your hostess, Danielle, aka Penny Dreadful, and I have a very special guest with me today. I am so excited, thrilled to have my guest here today, Nick Besink. He is a freelance video engineer and broadcast consultant who's worked for Disney ABC Television Group, and he's worked on such shows as The View, great performances, The World of Jim Henson and Antigone, Charlie Rose, and the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour, among many other things. He's currently the station manager at OPTV in Oradell, New Jersey, but Dark Shadows fans will know his name from the show's end credits, which of course you must always watch, I insist. Nick Besink, of course, served as Dark Shadows' senior video operator, and it is my pleasure to have him here today. Thank you for joining me, Nick.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Oh my goodness, what a delight. Now, this is amazing how we connected, because you run this TV station now in New Jersey, right? And you had told me you were semi-retired and you're running the station, right? And I got this email periodically in the Shilling Shockers account, which I'd mentioned before. You know, I did this horror movie host show for 10 years where I showed movies like Carnival of Souls and The Brain That Wouldn't Die and things like that on local television. And I got an email and it was saying, oh, do you have more episodes of the show? Because we had showed your episodes in the past. Do you have any more episodes? And I read the signature and it said Nicholas Besink. And I said, no way, it can't be. And Rebecca, our director, usually reads those emails and responds. So you had written before to the address, and Rebecca had corresponded with Rebecca. And I said, it can't be him. And so I wrote, and sure enough, it was you.
Oh, yeah. I like showing movies. We're a little bit of a different type of station. It's a PEG station, which is public, educational, and governmental here locally in northern New Jersey. And we're seen by about 50,000 people, I suppose, in the area by way of Verizon, because they distribute our station to other towns as well. And now we're also on local BTV, which means the whole New York area can watch my station, which is great. But I'd like to be a little different in that I'm just not doing local broadcasting of local events, is that I, like on the Saturdays and Sundays, I also broadcast old movies, which people really, really got to like an awful lot. And I've gotten comments about it. So I used to air Shilling Shockers, and I said, interesting. I wonder if they're still around. So that's why I wrote to you guys to find out if you had any more new episodes, because this is something that's not seen on regular broadcast television anymore. And there are still people out there that really love it. Right now, there is a group out in California in Bodega Bay that do creature features. Mm-hmm. So I've been taking their feeds on a weekly basis and integrating that with different places where I have been able to pick up local generated movies by way of the horror hosts. There's like 3 or 4 horror hosts at this point. And I guess the most popular one out there right now that most people can at least see across the United States was Svengoolie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even watch it myself.
Yeah. Oh, he's great.
He's a funny guy. He really is.
Yeah, and he's a really nice person too.
Yeah, it seems to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you for continuing to run my moldy oldie episodes. That's really cool. So talk a little bit, if you would, about how you got into broadcasting, like in the first place. How did you get involved in this business?
Yeah, well, that was very interesting in that when we got our first television, which was back in the early 1950s, I always knew for some way or somehow I was going to get into radio or television. I knew it. I never had to try to figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. And when I had the opportunity, I majored in electronics. As a matter of fact, before I got into television, I worked for RCA on the F-111 jet radar project for a couple of years. But again, it was something that I wanted to get into television at least, or radio. I almost had the opportunity of going out to a radio station out in Peoria, but I wasn't geared up at that time and being able to do so. So I guess it was around 1970 or so, I sent out a bunch of resumes. Being that I had an electronics background, I went to the technical aspect of television. And I had gotten 2 callbacks, one from ABC in New York, and the other one, which is a local network that was starting up here in New Jersey called the New Jersey Network. Unfortunately, they weren't going to have any studios readily available in northern New Jersey, and the only station they had was in Trenton. And I couldn't see myself traveling down to Trenton every day, although I was going to be a beautiful, brand new facility down there. Matter of fact, when I went for an interview there, the cement on the floor was still wet.
Wow.
That's how new it was. So I wound up going to ABC, and which was in 1970, May of 1970. It was early May, as a matter of fact. I walked out the door on a Friday at RCA, and then on a Monday went to ABC. And of course, I was like a kid in a candy store with that because, I, like most people, watched television, and at that time watched television a lot. And so to see these things in reality, as opposed to just seeing it on the tube, was overwhelming, to say the least. One of the first programs I worked on was an old show in the morning called Betsy Palmer's Girl Talk. And I did that here and there. I did the news. They were breaking me in on a lot of the different aspects that ABC Network had. And then towards the end of the month, they sent me down to Dark Shadows. I walked in there and I was totally bowled over because the set looked real on TV. And actually, they did such a great job in seeing it in person. It looked real in person. Matter of fact,
wow.
the stone of the foyer looked so real, I had to knock on it to believe that it wasn't really stone. And as I said, they did such a great job with the scenics on it that I was really amazed.
It's Cy Tomashoff, right?
Yes, yeah. Yes. He was really good. Matter of fact, he, I guess about a month or so later, he was doing a graveyard scene and he was working on a graveyard stone. And I'm on my way into the studio from getting out of the control room. And he says, maybe you can help me with this. And he picks up this, what looks to be a gravestone, and he throws it at me. And I went, oh. And actually, it was made of styrofoam. So it was very, very light. But again, he did such a great job. It looked very, very real. And a lot of little things like that happened that only the people that worked there would know, little odds and ends that happened. Another quickie little story about what happened in rehearsal was we were doing a scene again in the graveyard, and they had about 3 or 4 people that were buried in actual dirt on the set. And they had little breathing tubes that they can breathe while they're buried, supposedly. Well, they did the scene, and they popped out, of course, at the given moment. And what happened was the scene, for some reason or another, didn't go exactly right. So they said, okay, back in the graves, we're going to pat you down, and we'll start all over again. Well, because they got up to begin with, and it was very dusty, the earth itself was not damp, it was dry, so it was a lot of dust.
Yeah.
So as they started burying the people back into the graves, a couple of the air tubes got plugged up, and they jumped up again, going... So they actually had to stop for a while until the dust settled, and then we reshot the scene again.
Wow, which was a rarity on Dark Shadows, especially in the earlier days, for sure.
Yeah, well, they actually shot it as if it was a live program. Mm-hmm. They back in the 60s especially, they were coming out of doing live soap operas to doing tape. But because they were used to the fact that they were doing it live, and also the fact that they had a limited amount of time that they had the tape machines to do the recordings, they really tried to shoot it as if it was live. And we even rolled the commercials in at the same time.
Wow.
So when you saw a commercial that appeared in the show, we actually rolled them as well. Occasionally, if a sponsor had changed, they would edit in a different commercial, but that wasn't the standard procedure. Most times, they knew in advance what commercials were going to air at what particular time in the shows, and they rolled them, and then at the end of the day, the show was complete, ready for air.
And the tape machines were located in another building, correct? Like it were.
Oh, yeah. Most of the tape machines were located at 66th Street, though the studio for Dark Shadows was on 53rd Street. So we had lines by way of AT&T long lines that allowed us to send the signal up to the tape room on 66th Street, and they did the recordings there.
And then there was limited access to those after because other programs were going to be using those tape machines, correct?
Oh, yeah. Again, though ABC had a lot of tape machines, they also had a lot of programming going on. So they would book a tape machine for a given amount of time and really didn't want to go over because somebody else was scheduled to use that tape machine later in the day. Don't forget, in addition to Dark Shadows, they had the two newscasts they had to do, The World Apart, The Best of Everything. Again, Betsy Palmer's Girl Talk. Dick Cavett show was going on at that time. Especially at 6 o'clock, everything rolled because we had so many things going on at 6, from network news to local news to the Cavett show. And if some of the soap operas were still in production, they may be taping at that hour as well. So it was very busy.
Now you mentioned that you were an avid television watcher prior to working on. Did you watch Dark Shadows? Were you a Dark Shadows viewer at that time?
Well, while I was, again, as it started, I was still in school. So what happened? They said, "Well, there's a new soap opera coming on." So I made sure that I was home on the first day of air of Dark Shadows and watched it from the first day. So I was actually, very much an avid fan of Dark Shadows.
So you watched it from the pre-Barnabas. You watched.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. Wonderful. So that must have been quite something, when you first saw a vampire on the show. Did you figure out right away that he was a vampire, or were you like, is he a vampire?
Well, they sort of let you into it subliminally at the beginning. Ironically, I even have a pilot script that the original title for Dark Shadows is called Shadows on the Wall.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a slightly different type of show. Later on, of course, it wound up going into the idea that you had a vampire in it, but that wasn't the original idea when they first came up with the show. But it was sort of floundering actually for the first 6 months or so. Also, the show started out, I think, in 66th Street, either TV 1 or 2, and it was shot in black and white. And then because ABC was going into color, they actually built the studio on 53rd Street specifically for Dark Shadows. And I'm so sorry I never took the book that was there as a explanation of how the studio came into being. There was a nice thing that ABC put together about the studio, why it was built, how it was built, and what features were put into the studio that were much different than other studios just for doing Dark Shadows.
Interesting. Wow. That is amazing. And this book existed at the studio itself.
Yeah, it was sort of like, like you would have the keys to the studio. Well, this was the history of the studio, and the book stayed there. Wow. And ironically, as I understood it, I think when they cleaned it out, they threw it in the garbage.
Oh, that's tragic.
That's why I'm saying I should have taken the book when I seen it originally.
Right. Now, were you a fan of classic horror films, a gothic horror, like the Universal films?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And of course, when the Hammer series came out, I was expecting to be very similar to Universal, although they did a little different take on it, and they shot it a little differently, had a little different flavor. But yeah, definitely. I can remember one that really got me. It was a Ray Milland movie, and it was called Premature Burial.
Yeah.
And that was a scary movie. I just got to recently see it again. Of course, it's not as scary as the first time you've seen it.
Sure.
And I had seen that in the movie theater, so it's darkened and everything else. So you had the feeling that it was a lot scarier. But yeah, definitely, I liked it. And then when I worked at Channel 13 here in New York, part of my duties in working was also, we used to do a show called Cinema 13. And part of my duties was to actually transfer films from film to videotape. And in the early 70s, I was very fortunate to actually get a 3/4-inch video cassette machine. So what would happen sometimes is if I liked the movie that I was doing a transfer, I'd make my own copy. This is before people had DVDs to see movies, and it was very rare for anybody to actually own a movie other than maybe a movie itself that was on film. And color movies especially were very, very expensive. They ran depending upon how long they were, up to about $700.
Wow.
And that was just for the stock.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate in that I got quite a few movies recorded on videotape in my own collection, and I was able to watch them at home. And of course, my friends came over and
wow, these are the benefits of working in the industry.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, great. Now, so you got onto so this must have been kind of fun because you had been watching it. So
yes.
Unlike a lot of the people who were actually working on the show, you were following along with what was going on. I think by the time you went on, it was in parallel time if you were in there. Yeah, so in parallel. So when you went on, you were the senior video engineer. Could you explain what that entailed? Like, what does a senior video engineer do?
Okay, well, basically, a camera in a studio setting is made up of two parts. The part that most people identify with and see are the camera people that are behind the camera. They are responsible for focusing and framing the shot. But the color, the look of the video coming out of that camera is controlled by the video engineer. He matches the cameras as well because, cameras are dumb as electronic things are at times. And though they've really become sophisticated these days, it still requires a human eye to look at one camera versus the other and make subtle adjustments to it so that when you cut from one camera, a person doesn't look pink and the other one, they look green. So the video engineer actually does the exposure, the black level, the coloring, and works in conjunction with the lighting director to produce the image that you see on TV. And it's gotten to be a lot easier these days as opposed to the old days when we did, say, shadows, because a color picture is made up of three colors, red, blue, and green. And they, at that time, and even today too, although now they're solid state, there were three pickup tubes. There was a red, green, and blue. And like the Technicolor process of movies, they had to be overlaid. And if they didn't overlay properly, you got color fringing. So that's why in some instances, if you watch the show on different occasions and early TV shows in particular, you'll may see color fringing where somebody's eyebrow may be red on top and sort of greenish on the bottom because it got misregistered. Not because somebody misregistered, but because of time and temperature, the cameras used to drift. And you were constantly adjusting them to keep them overlaid properly. So the three colors always have to overlay properly, otherwise you get color fringing.
Now, were there any special considerations for Dark Shadows? It was such a moody looking show in terms of how atmospheric it was and some of the gel lighting and things that were used in the show. Were there special challenges in terms of
yeah. Well, for one thing, the earlier cameras needed a bit more light. They base lit the studio for 250-foot candles, which by today's standards is quite high. But the thing that ABC complained about with Dark Shadows in particular is the fact that it was very low video most of the time. And if you watch, you'll notice that there were a lot of candles here and there. And they became the spikes in the video, you might say, because they actually came up to 100% of the video signal. So what that means is the fact you would have average video, say, between 50 and 60%, maybe a skin tone would go up to 70%. But in shadows, because of the moodiness of the presentation, most things were lower level because they wanted to produce that mood. Most of the soap operas back then were very flatly lit, and they were a higher value of light used. So Dark Shadows was out of the ordinary because it was the only show that basically tried to shoot it like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some days where if you didn't know better, you were actually watching a movie. Most people at home saw a picture on their television set, which is probably not adjusted optimally. But at the studio, we try to keep the monitors looking as best they can. And it was amazing. In reality, even in the old standard before high definition came to be, that you can get such a good image visibly. Of course, most people didn't see that good image. We saw it in the studio and it was recorded, but you couldn't actually see it at home. But there were some days that it was absolutely beautiful. I remember one, I think, that everybody remarked. It was the December 3rd recording of 1970. We did a seance scene.
Mm-hmm.
And after we finished the show, everybody remarked and said, wow, this is unbelievably good. This is like watching a movie. And it was, in fact, that again, it stays in my mind ever since that day it happened.
Yeah, and I've heard that more than once from people who've worked on the show and interviews and such, that it was shot in many ways more like a movie than like they would shoot a daytime television series. Now, of course, there were also, unlike a lot of daytime series at that time, and even a lot of nighttime series, there were a lot of special effects in Dark Shadows, ghosts and bats and disembodied hands and disembodied heads and all kinds of things, transformations, magic spells. Considering that the show was live to tape, how were you able to pull that kind of stuff off? Were you involved in the special effects aspect of it?
Well, what would happen is on those days that we were going to do, say, a disembodied head, we would actually set up more time during the course of the day before the main cast came in. And we'd set these things up, rehearse them, shoot them in advance, and then during the performance of the show, we would roll that particular piece in to the body of the show.
Okay.
So it was set up in advance, and they took extra time to do it. In other words, we would have overtime on that day because it took more time to do.
Right.
Also, we had two directors when I worked there that worked from week to week, Leela Swift and Henry Kaplan.
Yeah.
Henry, when he directed, we'd go home early. When Leela directed, we'd have overtime. And that's how it worked. Week after week, it would alternate. Henry was a funny guy. He really was.
What was he like?
He was a little flamboyant.
Uh-huh.
Leela was an early television director, and there weren't that many female television directors at the time. So she stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
She would get confused at times, but her instinct of putting the show together was very, very good.
Right.
And though they had different styles, both were interesting people to work with.
I'm sure. Yeah. Just getting back real quick to the special effects aspect. I noticed that the special effects became more ambitious around the time you came in. Was that a consideration of the evolving technology as the show went on, or were you saying, well, let's push this a little more? Or
well, yeah, I think they got a little bit more comfortable in the fact that they wanted to bring to television something that was used in movies an awful lot. And I think they got more comfortable and were able to try out different things to make it to seem a bit more interesting, like a split screen with talking to yourself or something like that. It again, if you stop and think about real old television when it was live, that would not be a possibility. But they got comfortable with the idea that it's being recorded and you can do things that you couldn't do if it was done live. So more and more things were recorded on tape and done in editing to put them together to make sure you had the whole production. They started using editing process much more towards the end than they did early on.
Right, because the editing became, because of the technology, it became more affordable later on to do.
Yeah,
it?
more affordable, easier to work with because there was different renditions of how you could edit and what you could do in editing. Originally, when they just did simple edits, they were cuts only. And it was actually a machine-to-machine type of thing where you can either do an insert of a picture or a butt to a picture, but you couldn't do any effects. You didn't have a switcher to work with to incorporate different effects. But later on, when the switchers even got smaller, they were able to put little switchers in the tape rooms so they could actually accomplish much more in the editing process than they were able to do early on.
Oh, wow. Okay. And how about the chroma key? Like Dark Shadows used a lot of chroma key effects. So how did that work?
Yeah, well, chroma key, again, it was something that was around really going back to the movies from The Invisible Man. I think was one of the biggest pictures that actually used it. And even in early day television, even when it was in black and white, they used chroma key, except that it was black and white. I didn't realize that until much later on in my career when I did a lot more reading about how the early day television worked. So it was a tool that could be used, but later on, especially when newscasts started using chroma key to do weather, again, people got more comfortable with it and tried different things with it. They refined the process a lot more. The system became much, much better than it was earlier on. And then a company called Ultimat came out, and they basically took what was the film process idea and applied it to television, which made it easier and more believable to do a chroma key than early on. Earlier on, you would get little snivets around a person, or you can actually see the cutout, you might say, of a person against a background. But later on, they were able to make it look like a matte and then shade it such that it was very, very believable. And then they tried using it more and more in television production. Again, Dark Shadows was probably one of the first, really, that I can remember that used chroma key in a production of that type. Again, it was mainly used in news situations.
I remember in one of your MPI home video interviews that you did, you talked about the physical challenges with being in that studio because the layout for the studio was like rectangular, right? It was like a long studio. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, it went from 53rd Street to 54th Street, but it was very narrow. So you actually had to choreograph the cameras and the booms and the sets as to how you go from one to the other. And at times, it got so bad that the cables got crisscrossed so much that you couldn't even get your shot. So again, they had to work the details out during rehearsal. I remember one shot in particular where we were in the foyer scene and we had to go to the old house, which is down the other end of the studio. After the cameraman was finished with his shot, he literally ran with the camera down to the other end of the studio, focused in, and within a split second, they took him on the air. And he was panting while he was doing it.
Wow.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize, that it was kind of cramped quarters to get all those sets in there. And sometimes you will catch a glimpse of the boom mic or the camera. And I remember one instance, there was Sarah Sharon Smith was running out of Collinwood and she was running to the cemetery. And they had established that the cemetery was some distance away from Collinwood, but the camera moved a little too far car to the right, and she's already she ran right into the cemetery. So she's already there. It's like, wow, that was fast, but it was kind of cramped quarters. I posted some pictures recently that were sent to me by Rob Saccone, whose uncle was a cameraman on the original Dark Shadows. And so you can see that there are a lot of people there and there's a lot of equipment there, because what we see as viewers on television is, you see the drawing room of Collinwood, you see the foyer, and you see the actors doing a scene, but around them, surrounding them, there was so much going on. And I think you really get a sense of it. It must have been quite a frenetic kind of vibe, I would imagine, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, again, you had to get people that, are ready to set up for the next scene, whatever that might be. We had as many as 11 sets up in the studio at any one given time. If we were fortunate where we're only using a few, that was gravy for us. But when they had a lot of sets, it was very, very tight. We had the stagehands, the lighting people, and then, of course, pre-setting what had to be done. And I don't know if you know or realize that even the music was put in live. We, during rehearsal, had a bunch of discs in the audio room, and a woman by the name of Sybil Weinberger was the audio supervisor, and she would pick cuts that Robert Cobert had scored for different sections of Dark Shadows. And she would try out different sections and when that had to be cued, when it had to be opened up, when it had to be taken out. Again, a lot of that stuff in soap operas of today is done in post-production. It's not done live. But back then, it was done live.
Wow. Do you know?
We had turntables in the back of the audio room were set up to do those music cues.
Now, do you know if Sybil was planning those cues in advance, like which ones she was going to use for that episode, or was she sort of winging it?
She got to know the run of the show and what worked where. So she knew a lot of the music cues, but again, during rehearsal, what she would do, she may think she likes a certain cut and play it and say, no, that's not it. Let me try a different one.
Okay.
And she would do that. And then, of course, she would make notes and then later on give the audio engineer the script as to when to open up the micro or the pots for the music cues, because they had to be killed at certain times. They had to be opened at certain times. It was, again, a choreography even in audio. Plus, for this particular show, we also had a sound effects person that was located in the studio, Tom McHugh, and he would do all the sound effects.
While the show was being taped?
Yes.
Wow. It's like live. It's like golden age radio in a lot of ways.
Exactly. That's what was impressed me about the show to begin with, early on.
Were you in the booth primarily, or were you down on the floor? Okay.
Yeah, I during rehearsal sometimes I would go out on the floor to watch the blocking of the show. And other times I would be inside just watching and making notes as to what changes I might have to make. Also talk to the lighting director as to what is coming up next, what to expect, and what we should do.
That was Mel Handelsman, right?
Mel Handelsman, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing that the actors really knew the lighting director's feel. In other words, I remember Mel was on vacation one week, and we had a different lighting director. And Grayson Hall remarked to the person next to her, and I forget who it was at this time. She says, this looks awfully different. I don't think Mel's lighting today. She was right.
Wow. You imagine just being there every day, and you just get the sense of what that should feel like compared to somebody else doing it. Sure. Do you have any, you mentioned Grayson Hall. Do you have any particular fun memories of any of the actors in the show? I know you were mainly in the booth, but you must have had some interactions with them.
Well, what was interesting is I think John Carlin, to a certain extent, was somewhat of a fan of the show too, because at times, if he was outside doing his piece, he would come into the video room and sit with us and talk to us while the show was going on.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he was a regular nice person. He really was.
Yeah, everybody loved John Carlin. Anybody I've talked to or met him or interact with him always cracks a smile whenever his name comes up.
Actually, I went to a reunion. I was up in Tarrytown a few years back, and Carlin and Pennock said to me, "You worked on this show?" He says, "You must have a picture of Dorian Gray in your closet because you don't look like you're old enough to be work on this show." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I was very young when I first started." I said I was in my early 20s, so yeah, I was.
How about in the booth itself? Do you have any kind of fun memories from being in the mix in there, or were you so focused on what was going on at it?
Well, we chit chat back and forth. Our headsets were split so that we heard the technical director and everybody else that was in the party line, but the other ear of the headset was actually between the lighting director and video. So we would chit chat back and forth, and I can switch between the two intercom systems. And Mel was very, very nice to me. I remember the first time I actually did video on the show, he says, "Don't worry." He said, "Everything will go well." He said, "We'll be in constant contact and talking, and I'll let you know as soon as something happens or there's a change that you have to address." And he was really, really nice. He was one of the best lighting directors I think ABC had at the time. He was a real nice guy as well.
Mm-hmm. How about did you work with Rudy Piccirillo and Ross Skipper?
Rudy
as well?
and Ross Skipper, both of them. Yeah. Matter of fact, I was usually down there if one or the other was out.
Oh, okay.
Always to fill in during their vacation time.
Oh, would you alternate or would you be there? Yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. How about Dan Curtis? Do you have any memories of him or interactions with him?
Well, the only thing in the control room, people say, "Well, the boss is going to be here today. Be on your best behavior now. Don't say anything, a little off the ordinary, off the cuff." Because obviously, when you get to know people, you'll say things here and there that, you get to know people. But when somebody comes in the control room that isn't there very often, you don't want to give them a wrong idea and especially when Dan came in. But I understood that early on, he used to be in the control room a lot more. While I was there, he wouldn't come in all that often, but he did make an appearance here and there.
Yeah, I got the sense that Dan was a bit intimidating, just that big personality that he had. I could see him being kind of terrifying, as a boss. Did you stay with the show until the very end of
No, actually, I wound up going over to Channel 13 in September of 1971. So, I didn't stay to the end, although I kept in contact with everybody.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, sometimes when I was finished working at Channel 13, a lot of the guys at that point in time, especially like after the news or different things, we used to go to a little place called Chip's Pub on Columbus Avenue, and we'd usually meet up. And you always usually find somebody from ABC there having some food or having a drink or whatever. So I used to go up there a lot of times after I was done, and I talked to some of the guys, keep up as what's going on. And of course, I still got to watch the show too.
Oh, so you continued watching it after you had left? Yeah. Okay. How about George Dichenzo, associate producer? Do you have any memories of him?
No, not really. I remember him being in the control room every day. And later on, I actually got to work with them at Channel 13, with Sybil, too, doing the Addams Chronicles from 74 and 75. I did the pilots, which we shot on location up in Massachusetts, in Newport, Rhode Island, and Providence, Rhode Island. And they were involved with that. Ironically, not many people got to see the pilots outside of the Congress of the United States because they changed some of the cast when they actually went into production. So they couldn't show John Adams being different in one episode versus the other. And so very few people ever got to see the pilots, but they were shot well. They were, again, it was all location shots. I remember one in particular where we were going up, I think it was Essex, Connecticut, and we were shooting at the Sally Dodge estate. And I got there like 3 a.m, and there's lights and you see this glow around the building. And they were shooting a very tender shot with John Adams and his wife. And again, it was a night scene and they shot it at night. And so they had lights in the windows so that when you look inside the house, and it was a real house, wasn't a set. You got the impression that it was very, very real. And also, Sally Dodge was a bit of an eccentric in that she had the house painted canary yellow, and that didn't go well when we were doing exteriors. So what they did is they wallpapered the whole outside of the house, painted it brown, which was the color that it would have been, and told her after they were done shooting, they painted any color she wanted afterwards. They did.
Wow. Now, so after you left Dark Shadows, you continued working. Did you continue working at ABC specifically, or did you go to other places as well?
Well, no. What happened is the second year that I was there at ABC, they were losing a lot of shows. Shadows was getting a little shaky. The Dick Cavett show was getting shaky. World Apart was canceled. The Best of Everything was canceled. They combined the local and network news in one studio, in the network news studio on 67th Street. So they were losing a lot of crews. And so what happened, my boss called me and he said, listen, I don't want to lose you, but it looks like you're going to get laid off because of seniority. And so he said, why don't you take a walk down to Channel 13? Well, I took a walk down to Channel 13. I was working at Channel 13 for 3 months before I actually signed the document that said I wanted to work at Channel 13. They basically made the arrangement from ABC going to Channel 13.
Oh, wow. Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, it was, matter of fact, while I was talking to him in his office, the technical director, J.J. Lopatkin, called my boss and said, if there's any way of keeping Nick, I would really like you to do so. And he said, this made it so much harder for me to tell you that you would probably be getting laid off. So he said, this is what I want you to do. Go to 13. And I did.
Wow.
And actually, ironically, I stayed at Channel 13 for 25 years. And in 1996, I made the transition and went back to ABC and spent another 15 years.
Oh, wow. Had a lot changed in the interim when you went back?
Oh, yeah. It was almost a different place because when I first worked there, Leonard Goldenson owned the network, and he took a different view of how to run the network. When I got back, Capital Cities was in the process of selling ABC to Disney. And Disney took a very, very different tact of how to operate the network, and they sold off a lot of things that ABC had, from ABC publishing to the record industry. You name it, they were just cashing in everything ABC had. When I first went there, before Disney finally took over, they were going to start a news network separate from ABC, but being part of ABC. And Disney put a kibosh on it. Didn't want to have anything to do with news. So they stopped that idea. Then they put a big divisive knife between ESPN and ABC. So what happened, Disney, for the most part, was shutting down ABC Sports, which, of course, was really known for doing sports over those years during the time of Jim McKay being at ABC Wide World of Sports. And it basically shut it down so that any sports they would take was by way of ESPN. The network affiliate stations were very unhappy about it. They wanted the ABC brand attached. And here they are handing off ESPN on ABC. I guess it finally got settled to some way because obviously they're still doing ESPN on ABC, but there was no dedicated crew or multiple crews at the time when I was first there of doing ABC Sports. They had like 7 different trucks that would go to different venues to do the sporting events all around the country. And now they have 0. The only little truck they have at the network is for doing Good Morning America in the park. and also some location shots here and there. But their big trucks that they once had for doing sporting events are all gone.
Oh, that's too bad.
It is.
Yeah.
It was a different company when I came back. They were the leader in sporting among the networks.
So you mentioned that Dark Shadows was getting shaky, that they could tell while you were there. Were you aware of that? Because my understanding, I mean, the kids were always still outside the studio. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Matter of fact, I was coming out of the studio one day and I had a script that I was marking for the next day, and some kids came up to me and they said, "Oh, we want your autograph." I said, "Well, I'm one of the technicians. I'm not one of the actors." "That's all right. We want your autograph anyway." So I had a signed autograph. It is the only television show I've ever worked on where I actually had to sign autographs.
That's awesome. And to this day, I mean, everybody, when I saw your name, I said, "Oh my God, it's Nick Besink." What? It's like, it's exciting, because you helped to create that show, and it's something that we love.
It was very near and dear to me because it was also the first show I ever got network credits on.
Was it really? So, okay. Wow.
As a matter of fact, I have one of the early at that time, nobody could have a videotape because they were just 2-inch. Mm-hmm. So I got one of the guys who worked in the film department, because at the time they used to make kinescope recordings of the show. So I have a black and white kinescope of one of the early shows I ever worked on.
Oh, that's great.
With my credits running
very cool. Oh, very cool. Yeah. And it's great that they made those kinescopes, because when they released the show to home video, they had to source some of those because the videotape masters were missing for some of those episodes. So they did use some kinescopes. There's one where they couldn't find from 1971, almost near the end, where they had stopped doing the kinescopes at that point, like way near the end. Mm-hmm. It's episode 1219, and the videotape master is missing, but a fan had recorded the audio of it off the TV, so they reconstructed it with the images and stuff.
Yeah, actually, I have an audio recording that I made on the last day as well. I still have it to this day.
Oh, you recorded it yourself? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Also, Jim Pearson, who was in charge of the Dark Shadows festivals. Mm-hmm. At the time I was working at 13, he'd always come over, and when he came into town, and he'd talk to me, and we'd do things like I did a piece for Joan Bennett as a retrospect of her career, and he brought a lot of pieces, and I wound up transferring it for him at 13. But he gave me a tape. It was the last show recorded of Dark Shadows, and there was a band around it, but the band was broke. And he said, "Why would that be?" I said, "Sounds like this thing fell." I opened it up, and the tape reel must have fallen out at some point, bent over the videotape, and it wouldn't play, of course, at that point. So I took the tape out of the reel, put new flanges on it, and played it, cleaned the tape. At that time, we even had tape cleaners. Cleaned it up, and the only thing that was damaged from the very end show was the opening, and the opening was easy to replace because you can basically take any of the Dark Shadows openings and reattach it, and the rest of the show played okay. So that's how the final last show was saved, is that I wound up putting it together. And
wow, so you put it together for the home video release of it. And wow, that's
actually
amazing.
In the syndication as well.
Wow.
At that time, he was still syndicating it. So I basically saved it from the being thrown in the garbage.
That's amazing that you did that. So, folks, you have Nick to thank for having the last episode of Dark Shadows. So awesome. So at the time, Dark Shadows went off the air. From what I understand, everyone was kind of burned out by the end of that too. Dan Curtis was ready to move on, make movies. The actors were kind of put through the paces, so they were kind of burned out too. I'm sure the crew was as well.
I think there was always snivellings as to what's going to happen. ABC was saying it's costing too much to do the show. There was always pressure. They were also running out of ideas for the show. So everybody was getting sort of down about it, and that they knew the end was coming. And I guess in a way they were sort of happy when it finally came, because now they don't have to be worried about it anymore.
Right. But of course, it continued to be popular, went into syndication, as you mentioned, and continued to be very popular. So how did you kind of reconnect with the show? You continued to work in the industry and worked on...
I can tell you how it came about. A friend of mine came up to me and he said, they're having a Dark Shadows Festivals in Newark, New Jersey at the Penn Station area. So I said, oh, okay, I'll go. So we went, and I got to see Ross Skipper, who was doing a little bit of a dissertation about his recollections of shadows. And they introduced me to Jim Pearson, and he was sort of standoffish about it. And I said, I really did work on the show. Maybe you don't know directly. I said, but I do have a kinescope of my credits on it. So he says, well, can you make me a copy? So I said, yeah, okay. So I sent him the copy. Then after that, oh my God, you worked on Dark Shadows. I said, yeah, I did tell you that, didn't I? He didn't believe me, I think, at first, is what it came out.
Well, maybe it's because, you looked very young, since you just went on to the show. Maybe it's like, oh, this guy was too young to work on.
So that was really the first time. When I worked at 13, especially the first 10 years that I worked at Channel 13 was absolutely amazing. It was like working in a film studio, you might say, because when I went over from ABC to 13, I figured, well, I'm going to a smaller television station, and I have to keep my limits about what's possible. Well, okay. What I didn't know is that they were just merging with NET, the National Educational Television, which was prior to PBS. And then PBS came into existence the same week that I joined Channel 13. And they changed their call letters from WNDT to WNET. Well, we had 17 shows and productions, 2 full-time studios and 2 part-time studios. I worked and worked and worked. I worked on a kids show called How Do Your Children Grow, Black Journal, Soul, which was a black music show, a music show with a guy by the name of Bobby Sherman, who was a person on WQXR, the local classical station here in New York. And that was amazing because they would tackle any type of music. One week we had the New Jersey Symphony in the studio. The following week we had Alice Cooper.
Oh, wow. So, that's quite a contrast.
Ran the gamut, to say the least. And then we did a live show on Tuesdays and Thursday nights called Free Time, and that was anything. It could be political. It could be music. I did 3 rock and roll reunion shows with them. From the Cadillacs, the Duprees, the Ronettes, the Crystals, you name it,
cool.
We did it. And I still have those recordings to this day.
Oh, wow, awesome.
Then I worked on, in between times, great performances. And one of the first ones I did there was Antigone with Fritz Weaver and Jean-Pierre Vaugeot. We shot on location at Lincoln Center. Then I did The Year of the Dragon with George Takei in our studio.
Oh, cool.
Particular Men with Stacy Keach. On location up in Albany, His Honor the Mayor. I went out to do the St. Louis Opera Company, Albert Herring, which was a co-production with the BBC. And then in between times when I was just quiet, I worked on the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. I did the very first show. I did audio on that one for almost a year before I handed it over again. And then I was doing video on that show and also technical directing from time to time. But I worked on that show for over 20 years. I did the very first show and the very last show from New York.
Amazing.
Then we had the Dick Cavett show back in the late 1970s. I am the only engineer that actually worked on the ABC show. And then later on, I did the whole PBS run of his show. So now again, on Decades, I get to see some of my old shows that I worked on.
Oh, right. Yeah, because they're rerunning those. Yeah. Now, do you have any memories of Jonathan Frid? Did you have any interactions with him?
Yeah. Can I relate a story?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. We were doing a rehearsal, and it was a scene where Jonathan Frid is in a coffin on a catafalque. And the cameraman at the point in time that was going to do the opening shot, you might say, it was Tommy Capace, and it was supposed to be where Grayson Hall goes up to the coffin, and there was chains, there were breakaway chains on it, and she goes to hit it, and then the door is supposed to open up. And the point here being that it was back in time, so Grayson, as Dr. Julia Hoffman, didn't know whether Barnabas would still recognize her because he met her in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, he goes to open the door, and there's a securing chain at the very end so that the door only opens vertically. Well, what happened, the chain let go, the whole door fell over on the other side, and it was pure terror on Jonathan Frid's face because the coffin could have flipped over and him fall on the ground.
Oh,
he
my
was
goodness.
elevated.
Yeah.
So what happened, everybody, I mean, the terror, nobody got to see that because we didn't use the shot, but the terror on his face was priceless. It really was. And so we broke for lunch at that point. Everybody went out. We got some sandwiches from a local hero place, and then we went back and we shot the scene after lunch. Awesome.
Now, what does the footage like that? I mean, there are a couple of snippets that survive from that. But what happened to that footage? Did they record over it or something? Or
so, Jim Pearson had been looking because sometimes some of that footage would be on the A tape.
Mm-hmm.
They recorded a high band and low band tape, which meant they were two different somewhat systems that recorded, and they didn't know which they were going to use for air, whether it was going to be a low band machine on playback or a high band. And so what happens, some of it was put up, they would use one tape for the final air, whatever that's going to be. And sometimes at the end of the tape, you'd see some of these outtakes. Mm-hmm. Very few of them actually were recorded or saved.
Okay.
There were a few, but not very many.
Yeah, I've only seen a couple of those.
And because this was in rehearsal, it wasn't recorded. This particular.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Happened. Oh, okay. So they didn't. That wasn't committed to tape. It was just happened during rehearsal. Yeah. Oh, okay. How about Catherine Lee Scott?
Well, at the time, she was a little standoffish. I got to know her a little bit more later, and I found out some background from Jim that, the kids really loved her. And I guess to a point, she was standoffish about it because she figured everybody was either wanting to take pictures and publish them. Evidently, there was some magazines out at the time that would publish, behind the scenes type things. And she didn't want anything to appear that she would think to be unflattering.
Sure.
So she sort of stood back a little bit. Later on, as I got to do the Dark Shadows festivals, she became a much warmer person and able to talk. And I remember one time when we were doing, at the time, the studio became a disco for a while.
Yeah.
And at one of the festivals, they asked us to come to the studio. They rented the facility out to have Dark Shadows Festival people come. They wanted to do a little tour of the studio. And they gave the mic to me and Catherine Lee Scott. And so we were going from place to place within the studio, showing different things, where the sets were placed, what it looked like, where this was, where that was. And so, again, we were sharing the microphone, and Kathy turns around to me. She says, "You know a lot more about the studio than I do. Here, have the mic." So Jim had asked me to talk for about a half hour. I wound up speaking for an hour and a half, and I still had more in me to go.
Yeah. Oh,
and they said, "Okay, that's enough for now."
Yeah. No. How about Kate Jackson? Because I've heard she was so.
She started the same week I did.
No kidding. Oh, wow. No, she used to go, I'd heard she used to go into the booth even to learn how things were done. Like she was really wanted to absorb how it was put together and stuff.
Yeah, she was good like that. Yeah, she was a very nice person to work with.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, some of the actors did that. They came in to see how things were put together. I guess they have a better understanding this way of how they can project themselves on camera.
Right.
Knowing what the other side of the camera it looks like.
Sure. How was the experience in the festivals? Like once you returned to it and to a fan event like that, what was that experience like for you?
Well, that was interesting. I remember one time I was coming back to we had like at the end of the festival, they would always have a banquet.
Mhm.
Well, I and my wife came back, and we were waiting around for them to set up. And in the meantime, Joan Bennett was still writing some autographs. I think Kathy Lee Scott was as well. And I was talking to somebody, and my wife pokes me, and she says, they're waiting for you. I said, what do you mean? They're waiting for your autograph. I said, you got to be kidding.
Mm.
I turned around, there was a line waiting for me.
Awesome. Oh, I love it. That's great.
Yeah, so, and I always signed my name, but I also put what the scripting for the day was. And ABC's subscript to indicate Dark Shadows wasn't DS, it was DRK.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I put on it. I always put the DRK, that they know that it was really me and it was real, because the only people that would know DRK would be the people that worked at ABC.
Sure. Oh, that's so cool. Now, have you heard anything about them doing the festivals? Like Jim Pearson seems to have stopped doing them, I guess.
Yeah, I guess he figured after the 50th anniversary, it would taper down. Plus, he got involved with T.J. Lubinsky in doing the music shows.
Sure.
So that's devoting a lot of his time. Kathy Lee Scott wants to have him still do the festivals.
Sure.
And she's been pushing him. Whether he will do another, I don't know. I haven't talked to Jim for about a year, so I don't know at this point. Although another friend of mine keeps in touch with him a lot more, because he was doing audio for Jim, and usually Jim will call him and say, hey, listen, we're going to be doing this or this. Are you available? And so then sometimes I would help out, like when they were doing some of the background records when I was up at Louis Edmonds' apartment. I was working that particular day and couldn't get off, and he did the recording of Louis and a couple other people at Louis' apartment.
Yeah.
But I set it up. I did the lighting for it. I set up the audio for him, and I said, all right, this is, you can go with it. Matter of fact, I don't think I've ever seen the final cut of that.
So the interview
probably appeared on one of the added features of some of the DVDs, but I haven't gone through all the DVDs.
Oh, sure, yeah. Louis Edmonds interviews, in the MPI releases. Mm-hmm. So that was you that helped produce that. Oh, that's great. Yeah. What was Louis? I get the sense Louis Edmonds was really fun to be around.
Yeah. Well, also he had like a little cabaret act.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was on All My Children for a number as well. So he took a little bit out of that. He had some original songs that he would perform. And I was at a couple of the cafe club outings that he had that was recorded. And a friend of mine actually made DVDs and some recordings on CD that he would sell at the festivals in cooperation with Louis, and had him sign a bunch of CDs, and he still has a few left. And every so often, when we did have the festivals, he would bring them, because they are very rare since Louis is no longer with us.
Yeah. How about David Hennessy? He's reemerged lately. There was last year the Halloween get together on Zoom. It was like a cast reunion, and David Hennessy was there. He lives.
That's very odd.
Yeah, well, he hadn't really done any Dark Shadows related things for a very long time, and it was great that he participated in that. I mean, the fans were
he was delighted. Very standoffish. He didn't want to have anything to do with the show.
Oh,
afterwards, yeah.
I had heard it was some fans kind of went to one of his restaurants and kind of made a scene, and that he didn't like that. It was kind of a lot of times fans, I think, will get overzealous sometimes, and it's a little bit of, I would imagine, get to be, I mean, at a Z level perspective as Penny Dreadful, I've encountered some strange people. So I can imagine at the Dark Shadows level, where it's like, network television where millions of people are watching you probably get a cross section of people that are a little yikes, So that was my understanding, but I don't know.
He was also a little devilish on the set.
Was he? Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one scene we were setting up, and they were ready to do their lines. The girl who was playing Hallie was in front of them.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a side shot, and during the time that they were just sort of looking intense at the camera, he was undoing the dress of Hallie.
Oh, no. Really?
So, yeah, just, doing some odds and ends.
Troublemaker,
unbuttoning it. Yeah, he was a little troublemaker like that. Then there was another scene where they had to stop the recording of a continuance of a particular part of the script because he was coming up in to do a voiceover announce, which was in the back of the video room in the maintenance area where we had the announce booth. And somebody else was coming in at the same time, and the announce door and the exit door clashed together and broke his arm. So what happened, they had to write something in the script that a Leviathan or somebody pushed him down a staircase, and that's why he has a cast on.
Right.
So they had to rewrite some of the scripting for the following week to put that in.
Yikes. Wow. So how did you end up being the station manager at how we connected at OPTV? Like, how did that come about?
Well, in addition to me working, and I was still doing freelance work even after I left ABC. I was still doing some stuff for PBS. The town was starting a television station, and one of the councilmen got a hold of a few of us that worked in television here in the town and asked us if we'd be part of putting the station on the air. And so we basically did it. And matter of fact, they just converted the station over to HD. And as of this past April, we're in HD on Verizon system. But yeah, I still run that. And I try to mix between local programming and other programming that I acquire. We belong to the Jersey Access Group, which in part is affiliated with the Telview Corporation, which makes video servers for different stations. And they host a sharing server down in Princeton, New Jersey. And people from Massachusetts down to Florida, and even out to the West Coast to a certain extent, share programming on it. So we can put programming on the shared server, and the members can take programming from the server to air on their local stations. And that's how I actually fill my broadcast day, with a lot of stuff that I get from the Telview server.
Nick, closing thoughts on your time on Dark Shadows and kind of reflecting on the show. I mean, I'm sure at the time, even though it was really very popular at the time, were you aware that it, or have kind of an idea that it would last, all these decades later? And how do you feel about that?
Well, as I said before, for me in particular, it has many firsts since I got my first credits on it. It was the first show that of any notoriety that people really remember, which is great. I knew it was an out of the ordinary show even at the time, because there's no other soap opera that was ever like this or ever tried to be like it. I knew it was different. I enjoyed working on it. I enjoyed watching it. And but when it got to the point where fans were really calling for it to be aired, I knew at that point in time that it's going to be a Star Trek type event. People will remember it and remember it and remember it. And to a certain extent, it was like a little family working there. Yeah. You work with these same people day after day. You get to know them to a certain extent, sometimes more than others. And it's a good memory. It's a good memory for all of us who have been associated with the show. Wonderful.
I don't know if you've heard, but they're trying to do a sort of a next generation sequel series to Dark Shadows now. Mark B. Perry is trying to get this off the ground. It was going to be going to the CW, but that didn't work out. But I guess he's pitching this idea of like a kind of a Star Trek: The Next Generation, but for Dark Shadows. Yeah. What do you think about that?
It will be interesting, but like anything else, when you do a sequel, it's not like the original. However, that's not to say it couldn't be as good as or better. I guess time will tell, and depending upon how they handle the show, whether it goes over with the public or not. Obviously, people will always have fond memories of the original. And there are many Facebook pages dedicated to old 1966 to 72 show that didn't stay on. Ironically, too, it was the first show in New York that went color. The other show that went color was General Hospital, which, of course, is still on the air. They went on the air in color within a week of each other.
Yeah, I'd heard that Dark Shadows is the first ABC show to be in color. I think they could have. I mean, they only say, they ran out of ideas, right? I've said this before in previous episodes of the podcast. Dark Shadows was known for lifting or incorporating classic horror tales into the mythology of the show itself and doing sort of the Dark Shadows take on it. And there are so many of those tales that were left untouched, where I think they could have continued to pull from the sort of the vast pantheon of classic terror literature, to continue perpetuating it.
Yeah, I think some of the old writers of the show may have been just getting tired.
Right.
And didn't want to pursue it. But had they changed writers that had a different take, yes, you're probably right. They could have expanded on what was there and have the show evolve.
Sure.
But I think the pressure from ABC about costs and, being canceled this week, being canceled next month, was weighing on everyone.
Well, Nick, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Thank you so much for meeting with me and for answering my questions. And I'm sure everyone will be delighted to hear from you. And hopefully there will be some gathering. Like you said, Catherine Lee Scott is definitely, she's been spearheading a lot of this sort of, keeping this going. Oh,
yeah. One little item.
Sure, yeah.
When she was writing my scrapbook memories of Dark Shadows, she asked a number of us over the years that had any recollections, and I sent a piece in, and she actually included it in the book too.
Yes, yeah. Oh, wonderful. I that book was so exciting for me to find in 1986 because at that time, Dark Shadows was in syndication, but there was very little in terms of media out there in sort of the pop culture section of the bookstore and stuff. And I remember being in Walden Books and seeing that on the shelf, and I can't believe it. And then it was written by Catherine Lee Scott on top of that, so it was such a cool thing to find, and I think that definitely helped to sort of galvanize a lot of the fan interest coming together for things like going to the conventions and things like that. So hopefully things will continue in that vein. I know there are gatherings periodically. Obviously, we've been in a pandemic, so now things are hopefully going to improve going forward with vaccinations and all that. So hopefully we can get back together and do something fun. So absolutely.
When do you think you'll be putting this up, posting it so that people can listen?
Oh, it will. It usually takes me a couple of days to edit. I'll go back in and clean it up a little bit, and then I probably will get it up later this week. And I will definitely send you a link to it when it's up.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Nick, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Folks, remember to check us out at terror@collinwood.com. There's also all of your favorite podcast apps that you can check out there. Apple Podcasts is sort of the primary place where you can subscribe. All of the podcast apps, Podbean, Amazon Prime, Audible, lots of different podcast streaming services. Just can download the app to your phone. Also, if you listen on Apple Podcast, I would appreciate it if you would leave us a review and leave us a rating. It really helps to get the podcast seen by more fans when they do Google searches for Dark Shadows podcasts. We will come up more often. So definitely give us a review.
And for as long as they lived, the Dark Shadows never truly dissipated, for there will always be terror at Collinwood. Terror at Collinwood is a Penny Dreadful production.